Two things. One, where Dr. McKendrick says that you're told that Vaticanus is from the 4th century. And the other one, David, because I don't know if you've seen this, which is where I asked him about the last 12 verses of Mark in Codex Sinaiticus.
Yeah.
And have I ever told you what his explanation was?
What was it?
That he says, because it has the shorter reading in Sinaiticus now. And I asked him about it. He said, you want me to give you the more complicated answer? I said, sure. And so he opened it up because he had the facsimile there. And he said, well, when you get to these last 2 pages here, he says, apparently, he says, you have different scribes that worked on the manuscript. He says, most of the Gospel of Mark was written by a scribe that we call Scribe A, he says, the main scribe. He says, then when you get to the very ending, another scribe comes in who's like an editor, and we call him Scribe D, he says. And he says something had happened and some kind of a mistake was made at the end of Mark. And so they had to remove whatever text was there and then replace it with this shorter ending.
Right.
That's what he said. That's their paleographical analysis of it.
Yeah, they picked out the entire sheet, which is 4 pages, and it was at the middle of the quire, a quire being 16 sheets. And so the middle folded out like this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's right in the middle of the 16 sheets, and 16 pages, I mean, and it's right there. The whole thing was taken out and another one put in its place. And it started out by they're writing really tight and tight and tight, super tight together, lots and lots of letters. And then as they start realizing, we got to make some space here. So they start spreading it out. And anyway, there's this change between spreading it out and getting it narrow. I may have gotten it backwards, but anyway, the bottom line is they finally got to where they covered down.
No, you had it right. Because it was tighter, and then they had to spread it out.
Yeah, and at the end, and then they left the room. They still left room where I say that if they'd just done it normally, it would have had all the verses in it, because that's the way it was originally put together. But in order to make
and your assertion there, David, is confirmed by at least one of the scholars and editors back in the 19th century. He said the same thing, and I've got the quote in my notes because he published that in one of the newspapers. You've been doing a video series on the history of the Jesuits. Do you believe they played a role in undermining the Greek text back in 1881?
Yes, in 2 ways. With the Sinaiticus, they did not physically change the text, because I can document the changes to the text and when they were made on a timeline in this book right here. I go into detail in that, and I have testimony that accords with that. But the Vaticanus was taken care of by Cardinal Mai and the Jesuits under him, and there is clear evidence that things were erased and written over, that there was rewriting on top. There was other things going on with the Jesuits. There's a second level, though, and that's the level of acceptance. The Jesuits had everything to do with that. Getting the paleography accepted, getting the literature accepted, getting the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus accepted. I think that had everything to do with connecting on that.
And do you think, in this very I've suspected what you just said, that somebody tampered with Vaticanus in the 19th century, because when Tregellus goes to the Vatican, he talks about how they let him look at it, but they were very mysterious and strange. And they said that while he was examining Vaticanus, that the priests are walking around making noise, stamping
Drop
their
a book,
feet.
loud noise, yeah,
trying to distract him. And he said that if he looked at any page for too long, like closely, they would come and grab it away from him
and walk, and that's it. He'd be sitting there without the book by himself, and they always searched him. He had to go and do a frisk and make sure he had no paper and no pencil.
So why are they being so paranoid about him looking too closely at the codex unless there's something amiss?
Yeah. Now somebody in one of their books had surmised that Mark 16 was taken out then, but we know from a catalog from the 17th century of the Vaticanus that verses 9 to 20 were not in Vaticanus. It says so in Latin in the footnote. I read it. So I know that wasn't one of them, but there are definitely a lot of things that were changed. There's just no doubt in my mind.
Just so our audience can follow along, the reason the change in Codex Sinaiticus is significant for the last 12 verses of Mark is because before Codex Sinaiticus was discovered, there was only one Greek manuscript that contained the whole Gospel of Mark that deliberately omitted the last 12 verses, and that was Codex Vaticanus.
That's it. That is correct.
And so there was
620 manuscripts that, as they were becoming known more and more, every single one of them had 9 to 20. The only one that didn't have it was Vaticanus, and the thing that made Sinaiticus so popular is that it didn't have it either. And there has been something, actually, Jack McElroy brought up an idea that I think it is possible, because the Schultz text, do I have it right here? By the way, the Schultz Greek text, which was done by a Catholic and used by Westcott and Hort, as a matter of fact, had some things connected to Vaticanus and some text things concerning that in it. And that text could easily have gotten in the hands of Benedict and influenced him to remove those verses. And so that they had somebody remove those and do that back there on Mount Athos and take out those verses there when Simonides may have written them. And then at the last minute, they switched it out because of that book, because it was available. And we know that Benedict spoke 12 different languages. And German was so common that it's a very acceptable possibility. It was something that Jack McElroy pointed out. He looked at the data and he talked to me about it and said, well, could it be this? And I went, and I checked all the dates because I'm writing another book on Westcott and Hort, From Faith to Doubt. And as I did, I went, oh my goodness, the dates do work. He could easily have had that book and probably did. And that might be why the Sinaiticus is missing it. So it's kind of an other way around. So
that's very interesting. I'd love to see you guys hammer that out in at least a short article somehow, as a possibility. Because up to now, what I've been thinking is that, how Callinicos said that Tischendorf took the manuscript and changed it and mangled it and did whatever he wanted. I've always thought that probably Tischendorf had something to do with removing or changing the ending of Mark in Codex Sinaiticus. That's been that working in conjunction with Cardinal Mai in the Vatican, that was part of what they needed to do. They needed to alter the codex so that it would match Codex Vaticanus. You see what I'm saying?
Well, the only way I'd have to, you have to mean that he probably did all those three sheets that were put in, correction sheets that were put into, or cancel sheets, or as they're calling, that they put into the New Testament of Sinaiticus. Then Tischendorf would have had to use that. Remember, it had to be the same kind of vellum. So I would love to do a check on the vellum in those compared to the vellum right next to it. The vellum of the 3 cancel sheets and the vellum that was right next to it, and see if the quality is pretty much the same. We know it wouldn't be extra pages because Simonides used all the pages he had. He said that. So it had to be something close enough to it so that the editors could stick in those 3 cancel sheets. So I'm interested. That'll be an interesting thing to find out, though, and to date it. But they won't do any chemical tests, as you know.
No, they won't. They have
Avery
not done
tried
them.
to find out.
Yeah.
And then they canceled it when they switched the committee. They were going to do it in 2014, and then suddenly they said, no, we're not. And I got the letters on that. I showed that in one of the videos.
Well, I went through this when all of this was first being debated years ago, and people were assuming, they were saying, oh, well, surely they've done like carbon-14 testing or chemical or iodine. Iodine is what they used to use back in the 1800s. And I said, no, they've never done anything like that. I said, if they've done it, you show it to me. But no, they've dated these things only with the use of paleography, with handwriting.
And with lasers and lights. they've used lights and shine lights and lasers and things like that, and this kind of thing, but they haven't done anything to to test the physical material itself.
Right.
And yet that is one of the vital things, as I pointed out up in Saskatoon when we were up there. The whole concept of testing the physical material is vital to proving provenance or proving age or proving legitimacy or proving chemical composition of a manuscript.
All right. Do you believe, and I'm just making up this question now that you've said this, do you believe that the Codex Sinaiticus should be tested to see if there are traces of lemon juice on the pages?
Either lemon juice or what are the solution of herbs, depending on how you translate from the Greek that we don't have. We have the digests that don't have the original Greek of the letters, so we don't know how it is. But we know that between the two different newspapers that they translated it two different ways. One said lemon juice, one said solution of herbs. But something like that, to find out what chemicals were applied. Yes, something stained it. And the question is what? And of course, they'll say nothing did, but let's find out if it's true.
And just so people know, because when you have published information about the yellowed pages versus the white pages, and I see people responding to that, they seem to brush over the fact that this is in response to the claim of Callinicos that those pages were washed with a solution of lemon and herbs or something like that to weaken the appearance of the letters and to alter the appearance of the text of the.
And what's interesting, and I jumping right in, but back in 2014, when Stephen Avery asked me just to look at this document online, and of course I've been looking for it for years, I just posited the reverse. He thought maybe somebody whitened the Saxon text, the text for Saxony, the 43 sheets or the 43 folia. But I posited the other way. I said, wait a second, this looks like me in seminary when I would sit there with my coffee and I'm reading my text and then I spill it and I start dabbing it up. But then it looks a bit like me, like they started to spread it. I mean, I had never thought of this before. They started spreading it and then they turned the page, and I'm digitally doing this while I'm talking to him and texting him saying, and they spread it across and they got it more even and they went further out from the center spot. And then the other side, they did it in reverse order and they spread it out. I said, what about the possibility of staining it to make it look older instead? And it had never occurred to me. I had not read what Callinicos had said. So when I read it and saw that Callinicos openly said that was the case and said so openly, like, oh my goodness, it took this 190 years, however long it was for another person to say the exact same thing. And I'm just sitting there looking at it and going, well, then this Callinicos guy, he's not wrong. And I realized that I wasn't on the wrong track, that I was possibly on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, that it's little things like that when if rather than reject everything, because what they're doing is they just say, well, Simonides is lying, Callinicos is either lying or he's a phantom, right? So we're not going to listen to any of it. We're just pushing it all aside, and they don't want to hear it. And so, but their storyline doesn't make any sense. And they're choosing to believe Tischendorf, even though they admit at the same time, many of them admit that they believe Tischendorf was lying about how he found the first pages of the Codex back in 1844.
And I got that documented in the pro Tischendorf books. And I show where they themselves said so, that he was creative, or he was a little less than truthful. It was like, no, he lied his face off. And the monks said he lied his face off. And if you follow the data and just add it up in ordinary English, he goes, no, this is a lie. Wait a second. If all this is a lie, then the conversation he had with the librarian is a lie. And that moved a whole new world.
Yep.
It was incredible. Now finding out that the guy's a born Muslim, and the guy was not trusted by the Patriarch of Jerusalem. He didn't trust the guy. And then all the intrigues, again, all that go into this book. I mean, wow. it became bigger and bigger. And every time I give a tour at Chick, and I have a big giant poster of this in our little library room, and I have it hanging. It's big, and I show them the colors, and I said, listen, Tischendorf in 1844 believes he has the world's oldest Bible. But by the time he comes back in 1859, this is what he's got. It's clearly stained. And here's my question. If you believed you had the world's oldest book, why would you stain it? The only thing I can think of is you didn't think it was the world's oldest book.
Exactly.
And what if they said, well, what if he didn't do it? Well, if he didn't do it, who did? And why didn't Tischendorf go and write and tell everybody, hey, what did you do to this?
Yeah, there's another point on that, because one of the things they talk about is that they found individual pages of Sinaiticus being used for book binding and stuff like that at St. Catherine's.
Yes.
And they say, well, why, how could these pages have been used for book binding if the story of Simonides is true? And my response to that is, well, you look at when they found them, they all found them after these events happened. And that's one. And two, it actually fits in with the fact that they knew this was not an ancient manuscript. They knew it was something that was modern. It was a manuscript that was, as Simonides, because there's over 23,000 corrections in it. It's considered the most corrected manuscript of the scriptures. Yes. It has all these mistakes. Simonides considered it a poor work, something that was not very well done because of all these
edited term paper.
Yeah.
Before it's turned in.
Yeah. And so, of course, the monks there, they would have known that, oh, this is from that guy Simonides. Well, it's not a big deal. So sure, let's pull a page out here and use it as a bookmark or whatever.
Well, because they had a scriptorium too. They had ability to make books there. And I posit, I would love to be able to go through a bunch of different old monasteries or book collections from monasteries and try and find that same vellum. Because I'll bet you we could find it. And we'd find it in the same condition as the Frederico Augustinus. It'll be the same bright color. I would love to find that. I believe it's still out there. I believe it's still findable.
When we went through all of this years ago, there were a couple of guys who actually went to Mount Athos because they were so intrigued by all of this, and they wanted to learn more about, because Mount Athos is where Simonides said he created the work. And they tried to go there and go to one of the libraries, and of course they couldn't get in because you've got to schedule those things well in advance and whatnot, because the Greeks are not just going to let you go in there and start looking at ancient works. But it's I think that would be odd. Love to go to Mount Athos with a camera and try to talk to these guys. But all right, okay.
I got to tell you really quick, though, for people to understand Mount Athos, because I really believe Mount Athos was a mountain in the middle of Greece. So like, what? Mount Olympus, Mount Athos? I mean, it's just a mountain. What's the thing? It's not. If you go into your Bible, into the back of your Bible, and look for Thessalonica, and then you find that there's like 3 fingers that stick out, and Thessalonica is right here. If you go 1, 2, 3, this peninsula is Mount Athos. This northern peninsula here sticking out is Mount Athos. And this has been inhabited by only males since 900 something AD. Monks go there. And that's where all of them there, you have to have permission to go in. It's been independent and tried to stay independent of Greece and everywhere else. It's just a monk's retreat. They put their monk houses there. They live and die there. And then they have different kinds of monks that follow a time schedule and ones that don't. And then they live there their whole rest of their lives on that. That is Mount Athos. It has a mountain at the end of it, but the whole thing is called Mount Athos.
Okay. All right. Now we're on the Jesuits. Well, we were, I guess. Now we've sort of deviated. Okay. Now, just to make the Jesuits current, so people understand the Jesuits are not just a problem from 150 years ago.
Yes.
What do you think about the fact that there are so many Jesuits surrounding the COVID-19 issues? Dr. Anthony Fauci is a Jesuit. Dr. Burks, who was his sidekick, also a Jesuit. Dr. Robert Redfield, who was with the Centers for Disease Control while all of this first happened, another Jesuit. Bill and Melinda Gates are Jesuits. They give millions of dollars to the Jesuit order every year. Then there is the Global Jesuit Network COVID vaccine advocacy. And then you have Jesuits calling for, quote, vaccine justice, as they call it. Instead of social justice, it's vaccine justice around the world. What do you think of the overwhelming Jesuit involvement and interest in things pertaining to COVID-19 and this entire global coronavirus issue?
Well, Jack let me research and write an entire comic book called Jesuits that goes into the documents that founded the Jesuit order and what they're really about.